I am Jenna Rayne, 30 years old, and I left a part of my past 7 years ago. A strong woman, I've built my career in data analytics and information security at one of the top tech companies in Silicon Valley. A career I've poured my heart into, transforming from a girl who was looked down upon by her family into a respected expert. But now, here I am, back at the place I once called home, Laurel Hills, a small resort town near Los Angeles where I grew up. Coming back after 7 years, I can't help but feel a sense of unfamiliarity. Everything looks the same, but to me, everything has changed. Laurel Hills is still peaceful and quiet. The winding streets, houses with red-tiled roofs, and towering white birch trees reaching for the blue sky, all of it brings back childhood memories. But for me, it feels like I'm lost in this place, as if I've been pushed out of my own life. My mother, Sylvia, has always favored Daniel, my younger brother, the one she considers the golden child. As for me, for all these years, I've been just a shadow in the family. There was a time I longed for my mother's approval, but after the huge argument 7 years ago, I left, seeking my own life. I built a career on my own, becoming a respected professional. But coming back here, I can't help but feel the indifference in my mother's gaze and the coldness from Daniel, who now has everything I once wished for. I step into the old house, where the atmosphere feels just like when I left. The same old pictures are still on the walls, and childhood memories unintentionally reopen old wounds inside me. The feeling of being a stranger in my own home, after all this time, makes me feel like I was never meant to belong here. But now, when facing my family, I'm no longer that weak girl I once was. Everything has changed. I didn't come back to seek their forgiveness or approval. I've succeeded and built my career on my own. I didn't return to prove anything to anyone, but to claim what I deserve. I won't let them continue to look down on me. My mother still sits there coldly, not even sparing me a glance. Daniel is absorbed in his phone, not even noticing I've returned. But I no longer care about that. I am back, and this time, I'm not just here to erase the shadow of my past, I'm here to make them realize that I am someone completely different. As I stepped out of the car and into the driveway of the house I once called home, I couldn't shake off the mix of emotions swirling inside me. The wedding I had come back for wasn't just any wedding, it was Daniel's wedding. My half-brother, the golden child of the family, the one my mother always praised, the one everyone expected to shine. Daniel, the one who had become a rising star in the world of finance. The thought of his success used to make me proud, but today, it felt like a sharp sting. He had always been the favorite, and I had always been the one left in the shadows, the one whose accomplishments were brushed aside. When we were growing up, it was as if I was invisible to them. To my mother, Sylvia, I was never good enough. No matter how hard I tried to prove myself, no matter how many times I succeeded at something, it was always met with the same cold indifference. Sylvia had always seen me as the failure of the family. The girl who worked too hard at jobs that weren't prestigious enough, who was always behind her brother in everything that mattered. She'd often look at me with that expression, the one that said I didn't measure up. No matter how many times I told myself I didn't need her approval, it still stung. And as for Daniel, he was the perfect child. The one she adored, the one who had it all, success, charisma, and a bright future that no one ever doubted. Now, after all these years, I was about to watch Daniel walk down the aisle, marry his perfect bride, while I stood on the sidelines, trying not to let the weight of it all break me down. He was going to be the star of this family, just like he always had been. And I was still just Jenna, the girl who never quite made the cut. Walking into the house, everything seemed to be set up with a sense of perfection. The decorations were extravagant, everything arranged to highlight Daniel and his fiancée. There were flowers everywhere, roses, lilies, peonies, each petal carefully placed like a symbol of the family's facade of happiness and success. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the faint scent of freshly baked goods in the air. To anyone else, it might seem like a scene from a dream wedding, but to me, it was suffocating. I made my way through the guests, all of them chatting and laughing in the warmth of the occasion, but I felt like an outsider. No one looked at me twice, no one acknowledged my presence as I passed by them. They didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't the sister of the groom. I was just a shadow, a distant relative, here because I had no choice but to be. When I finally saw Sylvia, she was sitting at the head of the table, chatting with Daniel's fiancé, smiling with that tight-lipped expression she always wore when she wasn't genuinely happy. She barely glanced at me when I approached, and when she did, it was as though she were seeing a stranger. Her coldness cut deeper than anything I had imagined. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't even bother to come over and greet me. He was too busy showing off, talking about his work and the massive financial deals he was involved in. He was the star of the show, as usual. To him, I was probably just a footnote in the story of his life. The girl who used to run off to work with her hands, the girl who would never understand the world of high finance, the world that was now his world. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think back to everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for to prove myself. For years, I had been the one who was never taken seriously, the one always belittled for the choices I made. Sylvia always said I wasn't smart enough to understand the high-level business world, but what she didn't know was that I had quietly built my own empire without their help. I didn't need their recognition, but damn, did it hurt to see them still looking down on me. There I was, watching Daniel bask in the spotlight, and I couldn't help but feel a strange, deep-rooted anger building inside of me. A quiet fury that had been simmering for years, waiting for the right moment to finally erupt. This wedding, this grand spectacle, it wasn't just a celebration of Daniel's love for his fiancée. It was a reminder that I had been left behind, forgotten in the grand scheme of things. But that was about to change. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar sting of rejection course through me, but I didn't let it consume me. I was done being invisible. I had built myself up, step by step from the ground up. I was a force in my own right, and now, it was time to make them realize that I wasn't just Jenna anymore. I was someone they would have to reckon with. I looked across the room at Daniel, laughing with his friends, surrounded by admiration. But this time, I wasn't going to be that girl who sat quietly in the corner. No, this time, I was going to make them see the woman I had become. When I left at 23, it wasn't just because of the constant arguments with my mother or the tension between me and Daniel. It was more than that. The truth is, I couldn't stand living in a family where I was never truly seen. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself to them, hoping one day they would see that I wasn't just the girl who worked hard at a job that wasn't glamorous enough, or the girl who was always pushed aside for the next big thing in Daniel's life. It didn't matter how many hours I spent at work or how many projects I excelled at. It wasn't enough. No matter what I did, I was always the afterthought. My mother, Sylvia, would look at me like I was the one who never quite measured up, and Daniel, well, he was the golden child, the one everyone was proud of. The one who always got the praise, the attention. I felt like a shadow, walking around in a house that was full of people but didn't feel like home. I wasn't stupid. I could see the difference in the way they treated me compared to Daniel. I wasn't foolish enough to keep hoping for something that was never going to come. So, I left. I packed my things, said goodbye without fanfare, and went to find a place where I didn't have to be the background character in my own story. I went to Silicon Valley, thinking that if I built something for myself, if I proved that I could succeed on my own terms, maybe, just maybe, I would stop feeling like I was invisible. It wasn't just about running away from the arguments, the pain, or the feeling of being unimportant. It was about finding a space where I could finally be seen, not as someone's second choice, but as someone who mattered. And while I may have walked away from that family, from all that hurt, I still carried the weight of it all. The feeling of being undervalued was something that had been branded into me for so long. Even as I built my career, earned respect, and became someone in my own right, I couldn't shake off that shadow of never being good enough for them. Coming back to this place, seeing them again, it stirred up all those old feelings. But this time, I wasn't going to be the same girl who walked away. I was stronger now. I didn't need their approval to feel like I belonged. And yet, the reality of their disregard still hurt, deeper than I ever cared to admit. Just as I had started to accept that the pain of family rejection was something I had to carry with me, fate handed me an opportunity that would change everything. I received a message from my boss at the tech company in Silicon Valley, an urgent assignment, one that would test everything I had worked for. The task was nothing short of monumental: a compliance and security audit for a $2 billion merger between Daniel's company and a major tech firm. At first, it felt like just another high-profile case, something I was used to handling. But as I read the email over and over again, a realization settled in my mind. This wasn't just a job for me. This was an opportunity, the chance to not only showcase my expertise, but also to confront the family that had always looked down on me. I had spent so many years trying to prove my worth in a world that didn't see me, and now, this merger, the very deal that could make or break Daniel's career, was in my hands. I would be the one to decide whether the deal would go through or not. The company he had worked so hard to build, his future, everything he had strived for, would depend on my judgment. For so long, I had been the one on the sidelines, watching as Daniel basked in the praise and admiration of our mother, while I worked tirelessly to build a career that no one in my family seemed to appreciate. But now, I wasn't just standing on the sidelines anymore. I had the power to make a difference, not just in business, but in the dynamic of my entire family. The weight of the assignment was not lost on me. As I looked over the details, I realized just how high the stakes were, not just for the company but for my personal journey. This was more than just an audit. It was a moment of reckoning. This was my chance to finally show my family what I was capable of, to prove that the years of hard work I had put into my career hadn't been in vain. But beyond the professional challenge, this was something personal. I was no longer the quiet girl who hid in the shadows. This was my moment to finally take the spotlight and show my family, Daniel, my mother, and everyone who had ever doubted me, that I was not only capable but also strong enough to hold my own against them. I could almost feel the weight of their disbelief, the skepticism that would inevitably be on their faces when they realized that I, Jenna Rayne, was now in control of their future. As I walked through the front door, the weight of the family expectations hit me hard. I knew what they thought of me. I knew that I wasn't the one they were interested in. Daniel was the golden child, always praised for his financial success, and my mother, Sylvia, had never looked at me as anything more than the failure of the family. It was as if I had never left, as if all the years I spent building my career in Silicon Valley, becoming someone they would have been proud of, didn't matter. There I was, surrounded by a sea of family members and friends, celebrating Daniel's wedding, and I felt like I was standing on the outside looking in. My mother didn't even greet me when I walked into the room. She looked at me, but her gaze was cold, distant. It was as if I was invisible to her, just another reminder of the daughter who didn't quite fit into the family's perfect picture. Daniel, on the other hand, was in his element, surrounded by his friends and colleagues, bragging about his latest financial deals. I could hear him, loud and clear, talking about his latest venture, the millions he had secured, the high-profile clients he was working with. He was the star of the show, the one everyone was proud of, the one who had it all. And then there was me, Jenna, the one who still got stuck with the mechanic label from our mother, the one who was never quite good enough. He didn't even acknowledge me. No greeting, no hello, as I stood there like a ghost on the edge of the room. It felt like I had never been a part of this family, like I was nothing more than a shadow. The way Daniel talked about his success, as if he had climbed to the top alone, made me want to scream. He never once mentioned the sacrifices I had made, the years I spent fighting my way up. All the time, I had been pushed aside for his success, for the narrative that he was the one who had everything figured out. My mother continued to smile, her eyes glowing as she listened to Daniel's bragging. She beamed with pride at his accomplishments, but when her eyes met mine, there was nothing but indifference, as if I wasn't even worthy of being a part of their conversation. And in that moment, I realized something. I was never going to be seen by them. Not for who I really was, not for the person I had become. I would always be the daughter who didn't fit the mold. The one who didn't live up to their expectations. As I dove deeper into the financial and security data for the merger, my mind raced. I had done audits before, high-profile ones, but there was something different about this one. This was personal, and while I had expected some usual discrepancies here and there, what I found made my stomach drop. The first few red flags were easy to spot. Odd transactions, inconsistent entries, payments to companies that didn't quite add up. But it wasn't until I started looking at the details of certain investment accounts that the full extent of the mess became clear. Money laundering. A whole network of funds being shuffled around in ways that didn't make sense. The more I dug, the more I realized the magnitude of the issue. There were offshore accounts, shell companies, and a tangled web of transactions that led straight back to Daniel's company. The more I pieced it together, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a small oversight or mistake. This was deliberate manipulation, market manipulation, insider trading, and the kind of financial fraud that could bring down an empire. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The names, the figures, the timelines, they all pointed to one thing. My brother's company had been deeply involved in illegal financial practices that violated multiple securities regulations. They had been stealing millions from investors, using insider information to push stock prices, and laundering money through fake vendors and offshore accounts. This wasn't just a small violation. This was a full-blown corporate crime, and Daniel's name was buried in it all. For a moment, I was paralyzed. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where I could finally reclaim my power, but it was also the moment that felt like I was about to tear apart everything I had once known. My brother, the one I had always felt overshadowed by, the one who had always been my mother's favorite, he was involved in something massively illegal. And I, of all people, was the one who had found it. I knew what this meant. If I moved forward with this, the consequences would be catastrophic. This wasn't just about fixing a few accounting errors or suggesting a few changes to make the deal work. This was about bringing a whole system crashing down. The SEC would need to be notified. Daniel's company would be under investigation. The merger, the one that could have made Daniel a legend in the business world, would come to a screeching halt. And my brother's career, it could be ruined forever. But as I sat there, looking at the evidence in front of me, I realized something. This wasn't just about business. This wasn't about family. It was about doing the right thing. I had spent too many years in the shadows, trying to prove that I was worthy, trying to be seen. And now, I wasn't just seen, I was in control. And this, right here, was my moment to make the ultimate choice. Do I protect my brother and keep this hidden, or do I make the call that could bring his entire empire crashing down? The answer wasn't a choice. Not anymore. I had worked too hard to get here. I had fought for my place in the world, and I would not let corruption and greed win. I was going to do what I had to do, no matter the cost. This time, I would be the one to bring the truth to light. I spent the next few days combing through every bit of data I could find, trying to piece together the truth of what was really going on. As the hours dragged on, I began to connect more and more dots. Shady transactions, hidden accounts, and mysterious names buried deep within the financial records. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation mounting with every new discovery. But then, as I dug even deeper into some of the more obscure details, something caught my eye. A name. A name I had seen before, but this time it was linked to the transactions in a much more significant way. I stared at the screen, the pieces falling into place, and my heart began to race. There, in the tangled web of financial records, was Sylvia, my mother. She wasn't just a bystander in this web of lies and corruption. She wasn't the innocent mother I had always known, the one who loved her children but had trouble showing it. No, she was at the center of it all. She was the mastermind. My mind couldn't comprehend it at first. My mother, the woman who had raised me, who had always treated Daniel like the perfect child while dismissing me, was the one behind the illegal money laundering and market manipulation. She wasn't just negligent, she was actively involved in orchestrating the very deals I had uncovered. She had been using her connections, manipulating finances, and siphoning money off through shell companies and offshore accounts. She had even gone so far as to create fake business deals to cover up the money laundering. I sat there in complete shock, staring at the screen as the weight of the truth began to sink in. Sylvia, my mother, was not just a bad mother, she was a criminal. She was the one who had pulled the strings all along, while Daniel's company and my family had been caught in the net of her deceit. The very woman who had always made me feel small, who had dismissed me as incapable, was the one who had been manipulating everything from the shadows. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Not only had my family lied to me, but the person I had tried to gain approval from my entire life, the one I had hoped would see me as more than just a failure, was the person behind it all. She wasn't just a distant figure in my life. She was an active participant in the kind of illegal activity that could bring down everything we had ever known. I felt betrayed in a way I hadn't expected. The years of hurt and neglect, the feeling of being overlooked, it all came crashing down in a single moment. And now, it wasn't just about confronting Daniel. It was about confronting the woman who had been the architect of our family's false image all along. And worse yet, she could be facing serious legal consequences. The level of her involvement could mean prison time, and this wasn't just something I had stumbled across by accident. This was the real deal. The authorities would need to get involved, and once they did, it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. But there was no going back now. My family, the family I had tried so hard to gain approval from, was built on a house of cards. And the person at the center of it all, the person I had been blindly trying to win affection from, was my mother. The very idea that she was the mastermind made everything I had ever known seem like a lie. In that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't just going to expose Daniel. I wasn't just going to make a career decision. I was going to take down the entire system that had kept me in the dark, that had turned me into a pawn in their twisted game. And it started with Sylvia. The woman who had been so busy controlling everyone around her had never expected her own daughter to be the one who would expose her. The shock of discovering my mother's involvement in these crimes was like nothing I had ever felt. My head was spinning, and for a moment I didn't know how to process it. Sylvia, the woman who had always been emotionally distant, the one who had dismissed me as the unworthy daughter, was at the heart of it all. I had spent my entire life trying to gain her approval, trying to prove that I was more than the girl they had seen me as. But the truth was even worse than I could have ever imagined. She wasn't just neglectful. She was the puppet master, pulling the strings behind the scenes. As I sat there, staring at the evidence on my screen, the weight of everything I had been through, everything my family had put me through, came crashing down on me. I wasn't just betrayed by Daniel, who I had always viewed as the golden child, the one who had everything, but by my own mother. The woman I had once idolized, the woman whose love I had always longed for, had been the one orchestrating the lies, the deceit, and the corruption. My family had been lying to me for years, not just about who they were, but about who I was in their eyes. It was as though everything I had known about my family was built on false pretenses. I had spent my life believing that they were the ones who held the keys to my validation, that if I could prove myself worthy to them, then I would finally be enough. But the truth was, they never saw me for who I really was. They never respected me. They never valued me. And now, I was staring at the evidence that my own mother had been the mastermind behind the very thing I had been fighting against my entire life. But there was no room for bitterness, no room for revenge. I wasn't going to be the person who acted impulsively or out of anger. I wasn't going to make this about settling scores or seeking some sort of payback. That wasn't who I had become. I had spent too many years fighting to build something on my own terms to let this turn into a personal vendetta. No, this wasn't about getting even. This was about doing what was right. About exposing the truth. I had always told myself that I would never let anyone dictate who I was or what I could accomplish, and this was no different. I had worked too hard to be the woman I had become, and I wasn't going to let my mother, or anyone else, define me or this situation. I wasn't looking for justice in the sense of punishment or revenge. I wasn't looking to destroy Daniel or my mother. I was looking to restore what had been broken, the truth. To show that, no matter what my family had tried to make me believe, I was capable of standing on my own and doing what was morally right. The truth had to come out, but I would handle it with dignity and integrity, not with loud accusations or bitterness. This was about accountability, not just for my family, but for the whole system that had allowed them to get away with it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring justice, about ensuring that no one, especially my family, could continue to hide behind lies and corruption. And as I clicked send on the email, forwarding the findings to the authorities, I knew that this wasn't just the end of a family chapter. This was the beginning of something new for me, a chance to reclaim my story and finally, for once in my life, make my voice heard. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. The weight of the truth was too heavy, and it was time to face the music. After everything I had uncovered, the money laundering, the market manipulation, and the role my mother played in it all, I knew that I had to confront Daniel and Sylvia. But this time, it wasn't going to be a quiet conversation. This time, I was going to take control of the situation. I scheduled a meeting, one that I knew would be difficult but necessary. I couldn't afford to back down now. I wasn't just a woman trying to prove herself to her family anymore. I was someone holding the truth, and that truth had to be heard. The room was set up just like any other corporate meeting room. Polished table, high-backed chairs, and that sterile, indifferent atmosphere. But as I walked in and took my seat at the head of the table, I felt a sense of power wash over me. I wasn't the girl who had been dismissed. I wasn't the one who had been belittled. Today, I was the one who held the cards. Daniel was the first to arrive, his usual confident swagger in place, unaware of what was coming. He gave me a quick nod but didn't say anything. He sat down, checking his phone, clearly thinking this would be just another typical business discussion. Sylvia entered shortly after, looking as poised as ever, but her eyes instantly narrowed when she saw me sitting there, waiting. "Jenna," Sylvia said, her voice tight, "what is this about?" I looked at both of them, taking a deep breath before speaking. I wasn't going to let my emotions take over. I was calm, controlled, but the weight of what I was about to do was still pressing against my chest. This wasn't just about exposing their wrongdoing. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about taking the power back. "I've gathered the evidence," I began, my voice steady. "All of it, the money laundering, the market manipulation, the illegal transactions that have been happening under your company's name." I paused, letting the words sink in. I wasn't sure what reaction I was expecting, but the silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked at me, confused at first, and then his face slowly began to tighten. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice almost defensive. I continued, undeterred. "I found the accounts, the offshore money, the fake companies, everything. And it's all linked to you, Daniel, but it doesn't stop there." I turned to Sylvia, and her face immediately paled. "You," I said, pointing at her, "you are the one who orchestrated it all. The shell companies, the illegal deals, the laundering, you're the mastermind behind it. You've been using your connections to cover up the mess for years, and now it's all come crashing down." Sylvia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's a lie," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But I wasn't backing down. "I've seen the evidence, Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I have everything. The transactions, the accounts, the paper trails, it all leads back to you. You may have been able to control this family, but you can't control the truth." The room grew colder, the tension thick. Daniel was silent now, his face slowly turning red as he processed what I was saying. For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. But Sylvia, my mother, was still trying to deny everything, still holding on to the illusion that she could somehow talk her way out of it. "You're not doing this, Jenna," she said, her voice low, almost threatening. "You don't know the consequences of your actions." But this time, I wasn't afraid of her threats. This time, I wasn't afraid of losing their approval, of being dismissed as the failure I had been in their eyes. This was about doing what was right, and the truth had to come out. "I'm not doing anything but telling the truth," I said, locking eyes with both of them. "And the consequences of what you've done are going to be far greater than what you've imagined. The authorities are going to get involved. This won't be swept under the rug like everything else. Not this time." I could feel the power shift in the room. They were no longer in control. I was. This wasn't just about a family argument anymore. It was about accountability. For them, for me, and for everything I had worked so hard to achieve. And as I looked at both of their faces, knowing the truth had finally been exposed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I could finally stand up for myself, not just as their daughter, but as a woman who had earned the right to be seen, to be heard, and to make a difference. At first, Daniel was silent, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed in disbelief. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly trying to process everything I had just said. I could see the anger building up in him, the same anger I had seen so many times growing up when things didn't go his way. But this time, it wasn't just anger, it was something darker. His usual confidence was fading, replaced by an overwhelming sense of discomfort. "You don't know what you're talking about, Jenna," he said, his voice initially cold and defensive, but there was a crack in it. He tried to brush off my accusations, looking at Sylvia as if to reassure her, but it was clear he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "This isn't what you think." I held my ground. "I have the proof, Daniel. It's all right here." I gestured to the documents spread across the table. "The offshore accounts, the fraudulent deals, the money laundering, it all leads back to you." For a moment, there was a strange silence. Sylvia looked like she was about to speak, but Daniel cut her off, his voice suddenly sharply edged. "You think I don't know that?" He snapped, his eyes locking with mine. There was an intensity there that I hadn't expected. For the first time, I could see something new in him, a kind of raw truth, a weight he couldn't hide anymore. "I've known about Mom's little games for years, Jenna." I felt my heart drop. The words didn't make sense at first. He knew. He had been part of this. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Daniel stood up, pacing back and forth, his anger starting to spill out. "You think I've been living in the shadows of this family, huh?" He continued, his voice rising with frustration. "I knew exactly what she was doing, but I let it go because I was too greedy. Because I wanted the success, the power, the wealth that came with it." He stopped and faced me, his eyes burning with a mix of guilt and defiance. I turned a blind eye because I thought I could keep benefiting from it all. I thought I could control the game. But now I see it all crashing down, and I'm the one stuck in the middle of it. The shock hit me like a wave, too strong to fight off. I couldn't breathe. Daniel, the person I had always looked up to, the one I had believed to be the epitome of success and integrity, had known all along. He wasn't the innocent bystander I had imagined him to be. He was just as guilty as Sylvia. The realization shattered everything I had ever believed about him. "And to make matters worse," Daniel continued, his voice low and filled with bitterness, "Mom didn't just do this for herself. She manipulated us, tricked us into thinking we were a family that had everything together, all while she was quietly taking over everything. The company, the assets, it was all part of her plan. She's been working this whole time to take everything. I was too blinded by my own ambition to see it. And now, here we are. You exposed her, Jenna. You're the one who found out, and now I have no idea how to fix this mess." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The betrayal I felt was overwhelming. All these years, I had thought that Daniel was the good guy, the one who had it all figured out, the one who had everything under control. But in the end, he had been just as complicit as Sylvia. He had known about the corruption, about the lies, and yet he had stayed silent. He had allowed it to happen because his greed outweighed everything else. "And Mom," Daniel said, his voice faltering now, "she didn't just do this to us, she did it to everyone, to our family. And we were all too blind to see it." The words hung in the air like a weight, heavy and suffocating. Sylvia, standing there, her face now drained of color, couldn't even deny it. She had been caught. The truth was out. But what did this mean for us now? For the family, for Daniel and me? The room was thick with tension. Sylvia stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief, as if she couldn't quite grasp the enormity of what was happening. Daniel's admission hung in the air, and the truth that I had laid bare was sinking in, but Sylvia still wasn't ready to accept it. "You're wrong, Jenna," she said, her voice trembling but still trying to carry that air of authority. She straightened up, attempting to regain control of the situation. This isn't what you think. It's all been taken care of. We've moved past this. Everything's fine now." I could see the panic in her eyes, the cracks in her facade. She was desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control, but it was over. There was no escaping the reality of what had been uncovered. "Don't lie, Sylvia," I said firmly, sliding the documents across the table towards her. "I have everything. The financial records, the offshore accounts, the transactions, everything is here. You can't talk your way out of this. It's all on paper. The truth is right in front of you." For a moment, Sylvia didn't say anything. She simply stared at the papers, her lips trembling as if she couldn't find the words. The silence was deafening. I had expected her to scream, to lash out, to try and deny everything, but instead she was silent. Her chest rose and fell with every breath she took, but no words came out. She looked at me, then at Daniel, and back at the evidence. Her mind was racing, but she couldn't come up with a single thing to say. The lies had finally caught up with her. There was nothing left to hide behind. Daniel was silent now, too, watching his mother carefully, as if unsure what to do next. The realization of how deep they had both gotten into this mess was finally sinking in for him as well. Sylvia finally opened her mouth, but the words that came out were weak, almost unrecognizable. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could control it all. But it got out of hand." Her voice trailed off, and I could see her shoulders slump as she sank back into her chair. The strength she had tried to project for years was now shattered. The woman who had always acted like she had everything under control was now reduced to someone unable to even deny the truth. She had no defense, no words to explain her actions. I leaned forward, looking her in the eye. "It's over, Sylvia. There's no way out of this. The truth is out. You can't hide behind lies anymore. The authorities will find out everything, and you'll have to face the consequences for your actions. Not just for what you did to this family, but for what you did to everyone who trusted you." For a moment, she looked away, as if trying to gather herself, but there was nothing left. The power she had wielded over me, over Daniel, for all these years was gone. All that was left was a woman who had been caught in her own web of lies. She didn't say anything else. No more excuses, no more denials. There was nothing left to say. The room was filled with the weight of the silence. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of justice. I had uncovered the truth, I had stood up to my family, and now there was nothing left to hide. It was done. And as I looked at Sylvia, I realized something. The truth had finally freed me. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to her, not to anyone. The days after I sent the report to the authorities were a blur. The weight of what I had done, of what I had exposed, hung heavily over me. But despite the turmoil, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. I had done the right thing. The truth was out, and there was no turning back now. It didn't take long for the investigation to gain momentum. The authorities moved swiftly, looking into the evidence I had handed over, the money laundering, the market manipulation, the illegal offshore accounts, everything that Sylvia and Daniel had tried so desperately to cover up. It was like watching a carefully constructed house of cards come crashing down, piece by piece. For Daniel, the consequences were swift and severe. His company, which had once been his pride and joy, was now in turmoil. The board acted quickly, and within a matter of days, Daniel was fired. The job he had worked so hard to build, the reputation he had spent years crafting, vanished in an instant. His name, once synonymous with success, was now tarnished beyond repair. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for him, but that was quickly overshadowed by the sense of justice that had taken hold of me. He had made his choices, and now he was paying the price for his greed and complicity. He had known about the corruption and had chosen to turn a blind eye in the name of personal gain. Now he had lost everything, the career, the money, the status, and there was no one else to blame but himself. As for Sylvia, her downfall was even more severe. The financial crimes she had committed were not just a violation of business ethics, they were felonies. She was charged with fraud, money laundering, and market manipulation. The investigation uncovered that she had been the mastermind behind the entire operation, pulling the strings for years, using her own family as pawns in her scheme. The authorities wasted no time in making sure that she would face severe consequences for her actions. I knew the truth about Sylvia, about how she had deceived everyone, not just Daniel and me, but everyone around her. And now her actions were catching up to her. She was facing years in prison, and the weight of that hit me like a stone in my chest. Despite everything she had done to me, despite the years of emotional manipulation and neglect, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow. But there was no turning back. She had chosen this path, just as Daniel had. I couldn't allow myself to feel sympathy for someone who had spent years destroying others for her own gain. I had spent too much of my life being controlled by their choices, too much time trying to fit into a world they had built, a world of lies. And now I was done. The aftermath of everything that had happened was overwhelming, but I realized that this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. I had faced my family, I had exposed the truth, and now I had reclaimed my life. I wasn't just Jenna, the girl who had been cast aside. I was Jenna Rayne, a woman who had fought for herself, a woman who had done what was right, no matter the personal cost. In the weeks that followed, I took a step back and looked at everything I had accomplished. The world had shifted around me. The family I had tried so hard to be a part of had fallen apart, but I had emerged stronger. The truth had set me free, and now it was time for me to take the next step, to move forward with a clear conscience, knowing I had done the right thing. As the dust settled and the weight of everything I had uncovered began to sink in, things in my professional life started to shift as well. The investigation and the public fallout had put my name in the spotlight, not just for my family's scandal, but for the integrity and courage I had shown in bringing the truth to light. It wasn't just the authorities who took notice. My company, the one I had worked so hard to prove myself in, began to see me differently too. Within weeks of the investigation, I was called into a meeting with the board of directors. I had no idea what to expect, whether it was a congratulatory pat on the back or a quiet dismissal. But when I walked into that room, I was met with something I hadn't expected: respect. "Jenna," the CEO said as I sat down, "your handling of the situation with the merger and the company's internal investigation has been nothing short of exceptional. Your integrity, your ability to uncover the truth, and your strength in the face of personal challenges have shown us all the true leader you are." I felt a slight blush creep up my neck, but I didn't look away. I wasn't used to praise, especially after years of being dismissed. But this time, it felt different. It felt earned. "Effective immediately," the CEO continued, "we are promoting you to Chief Security Officer. You've proven time and again that you have the vision, the drive, and the expertise to lead. We trust you to guide our team and oversee all of our security initiatives, both internally and externally." The words didn't fully hit me right away. Chief Security Officer, the role I had once dreamed of, the role that had seemed so far out of reach when I was just the girl who had worked maintenance for the subway system. And yet, here I was, at the top of my field. The recognition was not just for the work I had done with the company, but for everything I had fought through. The years of being overlooked, the betrayal from my family, the self-doubt that had once plagued me, it all came rushing to the surface. But now, I was being recognized. I was being seen for who I truly was. The feeling of accomplishment was indescribable. It wasn't just a promotion, it was the culmination of everything I had fought for. My name was now associated with integrity, with leadership, with strength. I had gone from the girl no one noticed to the woman everyone respected. The title, the role, it was all a testament to the fact that I had earned my place at the table. In the weeks that followed, I was invited to speak at conferences, to collaborate with industry leaders, and to share my insights on security and data protection. I wasn't just a part of the conversation anymore, I was leading it. And as I looked at the growing respect from my peers in the industry, I couldn't help but think back to where I had started. To the moments when I thought I would never be enough, when I thought I would always be stuck in the shadows. As my life continued to move forward, I realized something important, something I had been searching for my entire life. I didn't need their approval anymore. Not from Daniel, not from Sylvia, not from anyone. All these years, I had fought for a seat at the table, hoping that if I just proved myself enough, they would see me for who I truly was. But the truth was, I had already earned my place. When Daniel reached out to apologize, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of emotions. His apology, his acknowledgement of the wrong he had done, should have felt like closure. But it didn't. I read his message, a simple one, heartfelt but brief. "I'm sorry, Jenna, I never meant to hurt you. I've realized now that I've lost everything because of my own mistakes. I hope one day we can rebuild." I stared at the words, feeling the weight of the years of resentment, of anger, of betrayal. And then I realized I didn't need him to apologize. Not really. His apology wasn't for me, it was for him. It was about him trying to repair what was lost. But I had already moved past that. For years, I had sought validation from my family, hoping that their acceptance would make me feel like I mattered. But I had found something far more powerful, self-respect. I didn't need their approval anymore to define my worth. I had already built something I was proud of. I had created my own path, and now I stood at the top, not because of them, but because of everything I had done for myself. I didn't respond to Daniel's message right away. I didn't need to. It wasn't about forgiving him or holding on to the past. It was about acknowledging that the story I had always been told about who I was, the one where I was the failure, the one who wasn't enough, was simply a lie. I wasn't that person anymore, and I didn't need to apologize for standing up for myself. I didn't need their forgiveness either. I had long ago let go of the idea that they could ever see me for who I truly was, for everything I had become. What mattered now was that I saw myself for what I was, strong, capable, and worthy. And so, when the inevitable moments came, when Daniel or Sylvia would try to make amends or apologize, I smiled softly but remained silent. I didn't need to engage. They had their own journeys to figure out, just as I had mine. But I wasn't going to let their issues or their failures define me anymore. I had forgiven myself long before any of them could offer their apologies. And in that moment, I realized, the recognition I had been searching for all my life had always been within me. I was the only one who needed to see my value. As I reflect on everything that's happened, one thing stands clear. True strength comes from within. The journey I've been on wasn't just about exposing corruption or confronting my family. It was about finding my own power, my own voice. For so long, I allowed others to define me. I let them dictate my worth, my place in the world. But now, I understand something crucial. No one can define who you are but you. Jenna's story isn't just about a woman who uncovered a criminal conspiracy or stood up to a family who neglected her. It's about someone who found the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it meant walking away from everything she thought she knew. When you fight for justice, you don't just defeat the wrongdoers, you also reaffirm your own self-worth. Every step I took, every piece of evidence I uncovered, wasn't just about righting the wrongs around me. It was about righting the wrongs I had allowed in my own life. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't in bringing my mother and brother to justice. It was in understanding that I had the strength to stand alone, to face the truth, no matter how painful, and to trust that I was enough, with or without anyone else's approval. I didn't need to apologize for who I was or what I had done. I had earned my place, and in doing so, I had redefined myself. The truth is, we all have the power to change the story we've been told about ourselves. Life will try to knock us down, to tell us we're not good enough, that we don't matter. But if we stand up for what's right, if we fight for our own truth, we don't just defeat the obstacles around us. We affirm our own value, and no one can take that away. So, take this as a reminder: strength comes from within. It's not about being perfect or seeking validation from others. It's about knowing that you are worthy of respect, of love, and of success, simply because you are you. When you believe in your own worth, when you stand firm in your truth, that's when you become truly unstoppable. And remember, no one can define who you are but you. Your story, your truth, it's yours to write.